Hi, and welcome back once again to part 2 of the America Home of the Brave quilt. We will be preparing the focus part of the quilt in this lesson. Let's prepare the templates for the wording America Home of the Brave. Now on this set, the registration line is actually this dark line on the top and bottom. And you'll see if I lay these side by side, there's a gap. So I can't do it that way. What I have to do instead is a little bit of a haircut. So on the right hand side of each of these, I'm going to put my ruler down and I'm going to line it up so that it's right on the edge of where the printing on the paper ends. And yes, I'm using my rotary cutter, but this little bit of cutting on this paper really isn't going to hurt much. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that off. And now I can take this piece, put it up to this piece, and you can see now everything, the lines at the top and the bottom match up. My lettering matches up. So at this point, I can tape this together. And I try not to tape over top of the lettering. It's just a thing with me. I like to make sure that the lettering is free of tape. But you can do it however you want. So we're going to come to the next one. And again, I'm going to put my ruler down so that it's right at the end of where the printing ends, like so. Hold it in place, trim it off. Bring the next piece over. And once again, you can see how these are lining up perfectly. Just a little tip for you, if you're trying to do lettering on a project and you just don't know quite how big to make the letters, for every 100 points, the point is the size of the lettering in most programs. For every 100 points, that equals an inch. This lettering, I believe, is 3.25 inches, so it should be 3¼ inches tall, which it is. So that's how you determine that if you're trying to do lettering on another project. If you're from another country and you're trying to make this quilt for your country and you want to put your saying on it, that's how you do it. And of course the blocks you would make out of the colors for your country. So I've trimmed again, and I'm going to continue doing that, lining them up, and as I get them lined up, I'll take them in place. Now you can see I have a little gap here because I didn't trim quite close enough. So I'm going to rectify that now. I'm going to come back down here And I'm going to trim that a little bit better than I did the first time around. Takes the guesswork out of it. So now when I put this down, you can see, if I move it into the camera, you can see how it's lining up much better now than it did before. So it's ready to be taped. So that's how you're going to do the entire banner of letters all the way across. And then we'll come back and mark the panel. As you can see, I've marked the center of my paper template here and here. And I've lined it up along the seam line. And then I've pinned the template underneath my fabric, making sure that it's centered. And now I'm ready to start marking. One of the advantages of using the light fabric for the wording banner is because you can see the wording underneath the fabric very easily. So this is the time when you take your time and you begin to trace all the lettering on your fabric. Now, I am using a friction pen, which I use quite a bit. I've never had a problem with this particular brand before. And I like it in particular because it shows up so well. So now I have my first of many letters marked out, and I'll continue on until I get it all completed. And now I'm going to take the star template that I've given you in your workbook, and I have a scrap of template plastic that I'm going to use for this, and I'm just going to lay it down and simply trace around the stars. And I like to use a medium Sharpie. It's actually called a fine point, but it's not a real fine point. And the reason for this is when I'm done marking this, I'm going to cut out these stars, and I want that black edge from the permanent marker to be visible. It will help in placing where these stars are going to go. And you'll see what I mean when we get to that point. So now they're all traced. I'm going to now cut the inside of each of these stars out, and I'll show you how we'll use them. So now I have my stars cut out, and I can start to use those to fill in around the wording. Now we're going to be doing a lot of pebbling in here, and the stars help to break that up. So we're just going to place them randomly on the quilt. Again, you want to make sure you're keeping it away from the edges because those will be your seam lines. But we can start out real easy by just doing the first star in a clump, just the way it's printed on your sheet. And we'll do the other ones. So now we have our first series of stars drawn out on the banner. Now I could use probably another large one down here. And you just put as many as you want without overdoing it. On your quilt. And remember, where you don't see a star, you'll be doing pebbling. Now that's not to say if you don't like to do pebbling, do a ton of stars. But this helps to break up the pebbles. Also, you'll see if I lay the stencil this way, you can see the orientation of the stars, like so. But if I turn the stencil, it'll give it a slightly different look. So I'm just going to draw out two of them around the larger one. And you can see that this set and this set look nothing alike. So just continue on like that. Put some in areas above the lettering. Like so. And have fun with that part. Now this just gives you an idea of what your banner would look like once you get all your stars put on after the lettering has been done. Notice that the stars do not go down into the seam lines. I've avoided the seam lines at all costs because there's no sense of stitching a star that you're not going to see. So that's what you're looking for on your wording banner. Now I've got some scrap batting here. Here's one piece. Here's another piece. I just want you to know that it doesn't have to go the whole length of your banner. For example, this piece, let me bring this down so you can see. Can very easily go under America. And then I can cut off other pieces from this piece to go under wording. You only need it to go under the actual letters themselves. The excess will be cut away. So this is a great place to put your scraps. And I'm using a wool bat that will help to give extra definition to the letters. But you can use an 80-20 blend. You can use a polyester. I don't really recommend cotton because it doesn't give it a lot of puff, and that's what you want. You want that puff effect in your quilt. So these are the things that I would recommend. And what you're going to do is you're going to put that piece of batting down underneath, and you can clearly see that it's covering the whole word. Then you're going to pin it in place. And then we'll take it over to the machine and stitch around all the letters. I have all my batting pieces pinned to my panel, and I'm ready to begin stitching. Now, a couple of suggestions here. Because this panel is so narrow, it's going to be really tempting to you to use straight pins to pin these pieces together. I would not suggest that, because you'll end up with blood on your panel, no doubt. You'll get jagged. So take the time and go ahead and put your safety pins on. They're easy to take out. Second of all, you'll notice that I have this in my machine going from right to left. Most of the time we write from left to right. But if I did that, I'd have all this bulk in the bed of my machine. And it's easy for the batting to get shifted around that way. So if I just start from the other end, then I don't have to worry about it. And as I start doing my stitching, I can remove the pins, which also takes out a lot of bulk. Another thing different you may have noticed is I have on a clarity foot, and this is from Accents in Designs. The reason I'm using this foot, I'm using a Juki 2010Q, and it has a high shank, and I've been using the free motion quilting foot that comes along with it, but it's a solid circle, and there's places where the lettering lines might get hidden. With the clarity foot, no matter where I put it, I can see the line behind it, below it, and in front of it. So that's why I like to use this. This foot does not hop up and down, it hovers. So for those of you who have this foot, I definitely suggest using it. If you experience skip stitches, it's because you don't have your foot adjusted low enough to your fabric. It should just hover. It should touch the fabric without pushing the batting out of the way. Once you get it to that position, you shouldn't have any problem at all with skip stitches. So with that in mind, let's begin. So I'm going to come over here, and because I want to snip my threads between each letter, I'm going to do a long jump stitch and then later come back and snip. I want to start somewhere, like for example down here, where when I snip it, I'll have a long snip if I, for example, start here for the next stitch. So I'm going to come right down here. I've got my foot down, I've got my feed dogs down, I have my stitch length set at 0. Remember, that prevents your machine from having to work too hard. And now all I'm going to do is stitch along the lines that I drew for the lettering. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull up my bobbin thread. Speaking of thread, I'm using Superior's bottom line, which is a 60 weight polyester thread in the bobbin, and I'm using Issachor's thread on the top in an ecru. That's also a polyester thread. So I've got my bobbin thread drawn up, and I'm ready to go. Now just take your time. And remember, whenever you come to a point, you want to hesitate, take an extra step or an extra stitch. I'm going to show you when we come around here. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to take a stitch. I'm going to take one more stitch, and now I'm going to start back up. And that allows me to get a nice sharp corner. Same here, take a stitch, take another stitch, and proceed. And that's all we have to do at this point for the lettering. You really can't see it because it's being done in matching thread, which is a good thing. We don't want it to show because when we start working on the trapunto, that's what's going to push the lettering forward. And this is the first step of the trapunto, which is stitching the fabric and the batting together. Now at this point I've taken a couple lock stitches, and now I'm going to come over here, and I don't like to start right on a corner. Instead, I like to start somewhere so that I can join up with it. So I'm going to start this right here. I'm going to take a couple set stitches. And you can see how well you can see with this clarity foot on here. Now this is not something that you have to run out and get, but I like to tell people about things like this that will make their job easier. Because if I had the metal foot on, I wouldn't have the same amount of visibility as I'm getting with this foot. Now when you reposition your hands, make sure that you stop the machine first. Move your hands and then start. Now we've come down to where we started. We're going to take a couple lock stitches, raise our needle, and we'll jump over to another spot. So continue stitching that down until you get all your lettering stitched, and we'll come back down again and finish up this part of the trapunto. After all the letters are stitched down, now you want to turn it over on the back side and give it a haircut. And I like to use the duckbill applique scissors because I can get pretty close to the stitching line without cutting the fabric. But there are some places that you just can't get in with these scissors because they're so wide. In those cases, then I switch over to a different pair. They still have an angle to them, but I can get into areas like this that are much narrower, and using a little more caution, I can trim around the letters that way. Now this takes a little bit of time, so don't rush it. You don't want to cut your banner fabric. But when you're done, you can see how all your letters are puffed up because of this extra layer of batting And then when we actually sandwich the quilt together, this will add even more loft. So continue trimming, take your time. It's sometimes frustrating, but this is one of the slowest parts of the quilt. The rest of the quilt has gone together pretty quickly, but this is the part where you really have to step back and relax and do it right. Don't forget to join us for part 3, where we take this section and add it to the quilt and add the final row in preparation for the quilting. You don't want to miss a single episode, so make sure you subscribe. And also, you might want to join the Sit Down Free Motion Quilters Facebook group so that you can get all the templates shown in this series.